And maybe I'll do it from down here.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
So I'm Glenn Blackman, and I manage the policy office here within the Energy Division of the Department of Commerce. And I can see from the Skype that this is a lot of people who are, phoning in or using the webinar option. But it's great to have some people in the room. So thank you in particular to those of you who are in the room. So what I'm about to say right now, people who are on the webinar should disregard this, because it's about where the bathrooms are, where the water fountain is, what to do if we need to exit the building. It's completely different where you are. So for us in the room, the water fountains and the restrooms, you pass them as you came from the elevator or the stairs. They're right up there. If we need to exit the building or something like that, we're going to use the stairs just right down there. We'll go out across the railroad tracks where you're probably parked, and that'll be our point of reconvening. So that usually doesn't happen, but that's the info. And I want to again thank everybody for coming, whether you're online or here in person. We are excited to be starting the process of implementing our appliance standards bill. It's our first time to take up this subject in many years, and so we're very enthusiastic about the opportunity to implement these standards. Clicker.
Maybe we can just have Paul advance. We do, but you got it? All right.
Nope. So that's the Department of Commerce. We are an agency that does many different things, all of which are constrained energy is an important part of that work. What we're going to try to do here today is get everybody sort of on the same page in terms of the rulemaking side of this new law that was passed, and try to get your help in terms of identifying issues, figuring out priorities for us to work on as we're doing the rulemaking process. And then in the last part of the meeting, we're going to go a little bit deeper on the water heating standard as part of this process. So for all of the other appliances, it's going to be a little bit higher level discussion, and we're going to get a little more specific water heating. This is kind of a rough, Paul, you have a...
Your audio cuts out when you turn toward the slide, so if you could just remember to speak this way, everyone online will hear you.
Maybe I will stand over here, and then I can avoid having to turn like that. So we'll see how it goes. This is our schedule that we've laid out. This may be an optimistic schedule. It's one that has us close at 3 o'clock, even though we advertised this as 4 o'clock. We'll see if that works out or not, and we promise not to tell your boss if we get out of here an hour early, or half an hour early for that matter. We are going to talk first about those general, lots of different products, standards. Take a little break so that people who don't have a specific role on the water heater standard can wrap up at that point, and then we'll pick up with the water heater work that I mentioned before. I think this might be a good point just to do a little bit of introducing ourselves, just so we have a good sense of who all this is. I know with this many people on Skype, it's going to be a little bit chaotic to do that, but I think we should try. So again, I'm Glenn Blackman with the Department of Commerce.
Sarah Vorpal with the Department of Commerce.
And Sarah is the lead for this rulemaking. As you see, she's going to be the one going through the water heater part. Bob.
Bob Wolfer with Bradford White Corporation.
Eric Jaskowski, also with Bradford White.
Chuck Murray with the State Energy Office.
Jeff Weeks with NIA.
Liz Klump with Bonneville Power.
Paul Carrington with Energy.
Brittany Wagner, Department Numbers.
Todd Lumpkin with AHRI.
Shannon Corcoran, AHRI.
Brittany Pond, C+C, we implement on behalf of utilities in the region.
Oh, great, okay. Paul, could you give us, the people whose names you can see on the Skype meeting, can you run through those?
Actually, I think we can, perhaps we can show this. Can we? There we, oh, no, look at all those guests.
We've got Bill Hopkins from PSC, Brian Pickett, Conrad Eustace, I forget how to say Fred's last name. Hewitt from Northwest Energy Coalition, Holly Mulvanon, James York, Jeff Tripp, Jessica Raker, Kara Durbin, Kaylin Dorsch, Tony Koch, Sarah Can, Tina Jayawira from the Northwest Power Planning Council. Those are the people whose names we can see. Shall we open it up for other people to introduce themselves?
Go ahead. I'm not sure how we can. Anyone who did not see their name on that list, just go ahead and quickly identify yourself if you've got your audio working.
Eric Miller, Benton REA.
Ashley
Johnny
Armstrong,
Bosch.
A.O. Smith.
We heard
Johnny
Ashley.
Bosch, Northwest Energy Coalition, but not on Skype, just phone.
Okay, Johnny Bosch.
Anyone else?
Mike Reagan from Marine.
Anyone from Ream on the line?
All right, well, let's keep things moving here, and we will, try to involve the Skype participants as best we can as we're going along here. Feel free to use the chat function to send a message in, and Paul Currington down there can be your agent on your behalf. And as we're going through this, we want your questions. That mean not just during the meeting, but afterwards too. But feel free to pause me and tell me, got a question, or what does that mean, or whatever. So, what I'm going to do is very briefly go back in time to talk a little bit about appliance standards in Washington. And then I'll show how our new legislation, 1444, fix that. So we first started doing appliance standards in 2005. As I think a lot of you know, kind of how that has worked over time is that where states are not preempted, they create a state standard. Often that ends up being preempted because of federal action that occurs later. So, we don't ever necessarily expect a standard to exist in state law forever because it may very well become a national standard at some point. But we created some in 2005. Legislature acted again in 2006 and 2009. It's been a long period without a lot of state activity. There were some bills introduced, but they didn't make it into law until this year, 2019, when we had a big set of standards that were adopted this year. The kind of the structure of the law, if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, is that we have a lot of definitions in there, and then for different products there's an implementation date. In some cases there's a date when it says when the state standard ceases to apply. Then there are more generic type provisions that have to do with labeling, testing, certification. There's a section on penalties for non-compliance. Somebody asked me if we'd ever issued a penalty. Chuck, you have a question?
Has the RCW been updated yet to reflect our new standards?
No, if you look in the revised code of Washington, like on the legislature's website, you'll see a little note in there that says it was affected by 2019 legislation. We're in this period right now where the people who maintain the code are updating, and so for right now, you won't see the new bill in the code except for that note that says basically you need to go look at 1444. That's a good question, Chuck, and I didn't even set him up for that. So in terms of this year's legislation, we think of it as kind of two parts of one overall bill, and that is to set some energy and water efficiency standards for quite a lot of different products, on the order of 17 different products that were covered by this bill. And then it also sets a design requirement for electric storage water heaters. One package that is intended to reduce the amount of energy and water that's required to serve our state's consumers and businesses, and to help us move toward a cleaner electricity grid, one that can support more renewable energy and require less fossil fuels. These are the efficiency standards, the products that are covered by efficiency standards. You see a lot of water products, some lighting products, 3 commercial products, and then a miscellaneous list that we didn't really have a clean way of categorizing, so we just say, and these other things. Not to say that these are not important, because there's a lot of energy consumption in that last category that's important to us too. And then it covers electric storage water heaters, and we're going to talk about that in greater detail later on. It is a part of the bill. These standards, the ones that I'm talking about, are in every case someone else's existing standard and test method. A lot of it comes from the California Energy Commission, Title 20. We also use EPA Energy Star and WaterSense as a standard. And then in a few cases, we have federal standards that were developed but didn't quite make it into law, and our legislature has adopted that as the Washington standard. The bill has some other more provisions that aren't specific necessarily to the product, but are important in terms of implementing this. We have new rulemaking authority as a result of this bill to adopt a backstop standard if an existing federal product standard were no longer to be enforced. We can adopt that same standard by rule. We now have the authority to update our standard by rule if the reference standard has changed. So if the California Energy Commission adopts a newer version of the standard for computer monitors, we'll have the ability by rule to adopt that new standard as the Washington standard. And then finally, we have a provision that allows us to accelerate the effective date, have an earlier effective date than is specified in the statute for one particular group of products, which is the fluorescent high CRI lamps. If California adopts an earlier standard in 2023, we can, by rule, implement that an earlier date here too. The other provisions have to do with reporting when things become preempted, let the legislature know so they can change the statute. We also have more flexibility now in terms of relying on certification programs and testing that are used to show compliance in other states. And we repealed a very old water standard that really needed to go. At this point, then we really need to update our rules. Our rules were last amended in 2007. And so we need to go through and delete products that are no longer covered by the statute itself. There were some that were deleted in 2009, some in 2019. We need to add products from the 2019 legislation. And then we need to take a fresh look at the administrative and enforcement sections of the statute. By the way, I have a few copies of the rules themselves in paper form, if anybody in the room would like that. Anyway, so discussion goes forward. If somebody wants a copy of the existing rules, we've got a few of those around. And then if there are any clarifications that we might be able to address those through the rulemaking process too on any of these standards. So I'm gonna. I may be using the wrong deck. Just there, what I'm supposed to talk about now is the schedule. So, just in terms of schedule, and this is preliminary for a reason. I mean, some of it's not preliminary, but it really is kind of our current view of where we think this process will go, and it applies at this point anyway equally to all of the products that are covered by the bill. I mean, we don't necessarily have to keep everything on one track, but at this point, that sort of is our expectation that we will. But that is a process that will be fairly informal most of the way through, and maybe a little bit faster than what some of you have seen in other states or at the federal level in terms of the amount of process that's required for rulemaking. We are doing this initial workshop today to try to identify issues and set priorities and things like that. We've also we're in the process of publishing the formal notice that says, hey, we're starting this rulemaking process, and that will be published in the Washington State Register here in a few days. So it kind of coincides with this initial workshop that we're doing. And then what we would like to do is receive written comments from people in terms of scoping or issues that you want to make sure we don't forget about, things like that. Get those in by August 26th. Once we see that, then we would develop draft rules for our stakeholders to look at, conduct a second workshop toward the end of September, do that process again so that during October we could circulate a second draft of the rules for stakeholders to comment on. And then ideally by the end of October, we would be able to make a formal rule proposal that would then go for a public hearing in November, allowing us to adopt the rules in their final form by the end of the year. This process is one that we're undertaking, essentially trying to balance two competing objectives. One of those is to provide enough opportunity for us to do some back and forth on the rules and try to figure out whatever issues that may come up. And so, we would like to have enough time to be thorough in the discussions that we have. The counterbalance to that is we know that there's a January 1st, 2021 effective date for many of these standards, and that manufacturers need some time, distributors, retailers, just people will need some time to be prepared for that date. And so we hope to be able to reach the decisions that we need to reach by the end of this calendar year so that 2020 is available to the industry, broadly speaking, for implementation work. So that, folks, is our introduction about all the rules except the water heaters and my review of the process forward. And I think this would be a good time to see what kind of questions you have about this part of it. How can we help with your questions or your comments? If you've got ideas or suggestions, we'd love to hear them. Eric?
So is there going to be a opportunity for written comment after the first round of circulated draft rules and the second rulemaking workshop? Just like there is for the second draft.
There will be. In fact, I mean, while we do have this specific date of August 26th, where we'd like to get comments that would help us with that drafting, the comment window is always open.
Okay.
And we would like to, we'll probably put a date in. I think that's a good suggestion, to have a more specific date that's tied to that second rulemaking workshop, just to focus people's attention on that. The other thing, because I think I pulled up the wrong deck, the other thing that should be on this particular slide is just a reminder about how you can stay in touch with us. Probably if you're here today on the phone or in person, you already know how to be in touch with us. But on commerce.wa.gov/appliances, there's a form there where you can sign up for the email distribution list. That's also where we will be posting documents along the way. If you have written comments to us, we're going to put those into the document library on that page so people can see each other's comments. And then if you ever want to communicate with us by email, appliances in plural form at commerce.wa.gov is the preferred address to use for that. So other questions or comments about, yes?
Brittany here. I'm curious so some of the legislation did have 2020 dates, especially regarding lighting. How does that fit into your calendar here?
The 2020 dates. Can you remind me what those
Yeah, so it
are?
was for general service lamps. It was none to be sold after January 1st, 2020 manufacturing date.
And so that one, we are not expecting to need to adopt any rules for that. It's just self-executing. It's a provision that it's a backstop provision is what it is. And so as long as the federal rules remain in effect, then that duplicates the federal rules. It has no additional effect. Thank you for reminding me about that one. Paul, are we getting anything?
No written comments yet.
Okay. All right. I think we got a lot of interest in the water heaters, to my sense. Yeah. So, those shower heads are pretty nice, I have to tell you. I got one of those that's California compliant, therefore Washington compliant. I think it does. It's a good experience. We have a picture on our webpage too of a California compliant shower head. Well, so I think we had planned on a break at this point.
We just take a couple minutes if folks want to.
Yeah, if anybody wants to,
Real quick.
because you're, if you're not here for the water heater portion, then this would be a convenient time to exit. But of course, you're also welcome to stay in person or on the phone and enjoy the conversation to come.
So just take at 1:35. Does that sound good? So we're gonna throw everyone on mute and then we'll be right back.
Okay, I'm going to get back into the right spot in the deck. There we go.
And be able to protect it
I think
and
there's
not go
a,
above the 120.
yeah, and I think that's also a separate, like the heat, how high a set point you can have is also a different requirement, if I'm correct, right? So that
120 is the standard.
But that's a requirement that people can change. The reason I was thinking about it, I just know that there was some change, there was like these anti-scalding laws that came into effect, right, where they lowered everything. And so I know that's been something that people have played with. But in terms of the new standards, I have not heard anything or any reports from California about, scalding issues happening. Certainly I can understand from manufacturing side that the mixing valves is something that could be worrisome.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and get back started again. Are we unmuted? Fantastic. Pull up our presentation here. For the folks in the room, I wanted to point out that we put index words across the table. So if you're thinking of things but don't feel like speaking publicly or just want to capture your thoughts on a card to give to us afterwards, please feel free to do so. We'll definitely collect those. And it can be about anything, even though we're moving to electric storage water heater sections. Don't hesitate to put your thoughts on those cards if you need. Okay, so then I guess this is the real star of the show, as it turns out. And so the electric storage water heater design requirement that Glenn talked about is covered in section 5 of the bill. So this is just a summary of the water heater standard itself. So it applies to all electric storage water heaters with input rating 12 kilowatts or less, and then some other requirements as stated here. It applies to products starting in January 1st, 2021, to be installed, sold, or offered for sale, lease, or rent in Washington. And then the standard itself, the design requirement itself is a CTA 2045 communication port or equivalent, which I understand will probably be a bit of a conversation later. And then there's also some language about consumer privacy protections. So as one was mentioning with the general standard, Commerce has some flexibility on how we implement this. And we really wanted to hold this workshop early, given both the interest in this topic and the fact that it's first in nation. So we really want to open up a lot of space to bring in input. I also want to thank everyone, both on the phone and in the room, who participated in conversations that we've had up to this point. We've been able to have really great dialogue with a really broad range of stakeholders on this really cool, exciting issue. So I just really want to thank everyone and let everyone know that those conversations, between manufacturers and NIA and some other technical experts, utilities, they've been ongoing basically throughout the ledge session, but also after as well. So we really appreciated folks bringing a lot of input and ideas to the table, and we look forward to that continuing today. So just to point out a couple of places where we have flexibility, and then I'd like to do is open it up to the room to kind of think about some of these things together. So one place that we have flexibility is to adopt a later version of the CTA 2045 standard. So it's currently specified as March 2018. As you know, there's not currently a later version that exists, but were one to get published, we could by rule adopt that later version. We can also establish a later effective date or even suspend enforcement. And this is determined that it's in the public interest to do so. So currently the date is January 1st, 2021. And then the other is that we have this ability to adopt other interface standards that are equivalent to CTA 2045. And there's a lot of technical expertise that's here in the room and on the phone that can also help us think through that as well. So that's just a really high-level overview of some of the issues that we see that we would address through our, we're thinking about when we're thinking about our draft rules. At this point, I would love to sort of open it up for anyone to share issues or even, proposals, and Glenn will be taking some notes here, that you might be planning to submit to us via written comment, and that would be worth sort of bringing to the table to talk about, with this group of stakeholders that are here in the room and on the phone, so that we all kind of get a sense of what the work is ahead of us. So if there's a brave soul out there, we can also actually, what I always like to do, maybe we can just all take a minute and scribble down some notes, write some ideas on the cards or in your notebooks, and then we can talk together about what's on your mind. Sound good? Great. So we just want to take a minute. For folks on the phone, you can you can put directly into the conversation chat any questions or thoughts. Paul Currington, our lovely virtual MC, will be on there to take your questions, and we can bring them to the group. If you want at any point, as Glenn mentioned, and I'll just repeat one more time in case someone just popped on the line, you can send written comments, which, by the way, don't need to be formal or drafted by your lawyer or anything. They could just be, thoughts or ideas you have sent to appliances@commerce.wa.gov. That's just, we're here in sort of an informal capacity to collect ideas as well. All right. So is there any brave souls around that would like to pitch out some ideas or bring anything to the table, specifically around what I've laid out here, and kind of dig into a proposal or any ideas or any other thing that we should be thinking about? Yeah.
Well, this is Todd with AHRI. I guess I would just start by saying it's nice to see these 3 bullet points from the Department of Commerce as options to consider. This is a very, very new concept for members of AHRI. And to see even these potential discussion points being presented is very nice to see.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So Shannon Corcoran, AHRI. We did have a meeting, our water heater regulatory policy group, to discuss what our ideal situation would be coming out of this. We want, you're showing that at one of your slides that equivalency is part of an option here. I'm looking up there, I can easily look over here. That is one of the things that we really do want to have in here. We do need to have discussions as to what that equivalency means to both industry, to the state of Washington, and to the other stakeholders in order to be something that works for all parties involved, and not just those in this room, but also to the consumers and to the utilities that aren't represented here in the room.
Shannon, do you mind if I just ask a quick follow-up? Sure. You say other stakeholders, you said the consumers. Is there anyone else that you think of in mind?
I think utilities, all of the different utilities that are going to be affected by this need to have a key role in how this moves forward. It is my understanding that some of the larger utilities have been involved in this process and in the beta testing of these systems, so they're more prepared in order to move forward with this. But my understanding is that some of the smaller utilities may not be quite as prepared, and so this is going to affect how they implement and what their customers and consumers are going to be able to purchase, and the timelines that those utilities will be able to actually be online and effectively use this communication points. So yeah, it definitely is multiple stakeholders that we have in mind here. We also, we are concerned. We're watching what the EPA is doing as far as their E-Star program for the connected water heaters. What we don't want to see happen is something that happens here in the state of Washington. So our manufacturers and the utilities here have one standard or are doing one thing, and then there becomes a federal mandate that comes down, and it's different than what is done here. It does a disservice, I think, to all parties involved, not just the manufacturers, but also to the consumers and to the utilities, because it's never a good thing when you have to have one set of products for one area versus a different set of products being distributed to another area of the country. So we want to make sure that whatever happens in the state of Washington coincides with what will be happening on the federal level. A big one for us is that second bullet point, the effective date also. This is not as easy as one might think. When you think of, you're just adding a port, you're just adding a piece of equipment onto the water heater, it really is not quite that simple. There is a lot of design work that needs to go into making these type of water heaters and making them work properly. So 18 months really is a very tight timeline for the manufacturers to be able to redesign the products and make sure that they're going to function properly. Another key point in that is, again, dealing with the later version of CTA 2045. One of the things that we would like to see potentially is that the use of a USB port be one of the options. If that is the case, then we need to, as an industry, go to CTA in order to request them to start the revision process of the standard in order to include that technology within that standard. That could be anywhere on average 18 to 24 months just to get that standard changed. And I'm not familiar with their whole process, but having a background in codes and standards, 18 to 24 really is a industry measuring stick for start to finish of a revision process to an existing standard. So we need to keep that in mind, again, because we don't want to draft something here for the state of Washington, go to CTA and have CTA through the consensus process come up with something different. Because again, it goes into that whole play of you don't want to have different types of products based on the rules and regulations within a geographic region. And the fourth thing that, again, part of our ideal situation would be to have some type of phase in for the product classes. So start with with one class, get that all done, set up a timeline for the next class of products to be implemented, and then we actually have divided it into 3 different phases. So again, we're looking for getting one class of products redesigned so that that can be introduced, going on and moving on to redesigning their second class. So that's the ideal situation from our perspective. So those are what we're looking for.
Thank you so much for laying that out.
What is the schedule for the Energy Star standard development? Do you have one?
I don't, there is a check-in meeting next week, so I will be sitting in on that. That'll be my first one. We were supposed to have a meeting during the ASHRAE convention in June, and it never actually materialized. So I can provide that answer hopefully at the end of next week for you.
That's helpful. We'll try and find that ourselves.
And actually, I'd just like to, building off what you're saying, because I do recognize this idea of not unintentionally creating some kind of patchwork, that we're sensitive to that as well. And this is for everyone on the phone in the room, as you are all out there having these conversations, these places we are not, helping us stay aware of things coming down the pipeline would be really useful. So that's just a request for us. We're happy to host those kinds of information on our webpage, like as things, new standards come out, as things get published that are relevant, or hold a follow-up workshop that's necessary to understand something new that's come out. So I just want to put that out there. That's really valuable to bring up. So just keep us in touch.
As I get information, I'll be glad to share.
We have a question from Brian Pickett from HTP Comfort Solutions. They make electric water heaters. He says the current timing for implementation is a concern for us.
Okay.
And Brian, if you want to unmute yourself, if you have anything to add, you can say it right now.
I don't think I have too much to add at this time. Just since I'm not there in the room, can't submit a card with written comment. You know I'm here and what our thoughts are. Thank you, though.
And I would ask, so I know that, we've heard that the compliance date is something that has come up for several people. As much as people are willing to put a timeline onto what a delay looks like, that would also be useful so we can get an idea of the range that folks are thinking of. Just so we have that in our heads as we're thinking about what this means going forward. And then if there's any kind of, reasoning, for that, that number. So because, X standard will be coming out at some point, so you want to wait for that, or, whatever the thing is, that's kind of the reason for that number, that would be really useful for us so that we can kind of compare. Because right now it's just sort of apples and oranges of information we're collecting. So thank you for that, Brian, as well.
Jeff Wicks with NIA. Like Shannon, I don't want to create any confusion, and we are trying to work closely with Energy Star with their standards. We are in the process of updating the advanced water heating spec. In fact, many of the manufacturers are aware of that. We've been in constant conversation about it. And we don't want that specification to be in conflict with what's going on with 1444. So we're kind of, it's kind of like passing a car. We're keeping an eye on the one right in front of us. We want to make sure they don't get in our way, but we also don't want to be left behind, and we will be out in front, just because the advanced water heating spec needs to get it refreshed and updated with new technologies.
And I'm sorry, can you remind me, is there a date? It's not a date yet set for that.
Well, the date was originally set to be the beginning of Q3. We're pushing that out a little bit. I want to get better clarity on when we implement 1444 and Energy Star. We also, if we don't see a lot of traction on either one of those, we will just go ahead and start working on it.
Okay.
Then we have to, because our utilities, our stakeholders, not only in the Northwest, but Canada, the Northeast, California, are all looking for some leadership and guidance.
And Jeff, do you see any other touch points in that work with this work that we should be aware of? So just other things that might be crossover points that we should be tracking? Absolutely.
The or equivalent document will be included in the advanced water heating specification.
Can you quickly explain to folks what do you mean by the or equivalent document?
So the or equivalent document is it's about a page and a half sheet where we define communication, the openness of this communication, how it will answer all the questions that CTA 2045 already does. But if someone can come up with an or equivalent that matches those things, we're perfectly fine with that. We have yet to see one, and we don't know of one, but we also look to industry with all kinds of, they always come up with good creative solutions. So what we try to do is put a standard, performance standard and a test methodology, and let industry innovate and come up with solutions.
Great.
So the other ones you should be
Yeah.
looking at and considering is what's going on in California. I'll have to remind everybody here in the room, NEA is fuel neutral. We're funded by both electric and gas, but in California, they are looking at electrification. And one of the ways they are planning to do that is convert roughly 13.3 million water heaters over the next 10 years from gas to electric. In addition to doing the gas to electric, they're using heat pump technologies. They're also including demand response in that. And they are looking for solutions. They are looking to a standard. CTA 2045 has a high degree of popularity, but also open ADR. So we need to be conscious of that, what's going on. As the manufacturers delve into that, California market is huge, and it's an early replacement, early retirement. So this is over and above the normal 12 to 15 year cycle time on water heaters. They're going to be making a lot of water heaters for the California market, and that's important for us to look at that and make sure there's no conflict there as well. Additionally, Title 24 and JA 113 or JA 13 are requesting time of use rates to be loaded, programmed into electric heat pump water heaters, and even probably gas heat pump water heaters in the future. And that's going through the legislative process.
Great. So some of the more bleeding edge stuff that's happening in California.
Right.
Yeah.
Having said that, I will say, if you were to do CTA 2045, you would be compliant on all of those. And if somebody mentioned, if you want to add a USB port to CTA 2045, perfectly possible. I would say more like 6 to 12 months, as they are very aggressive and they're pretty nimble. EPRI is they've got some changes in process now, just some fine tuning elements. It could easily be inserted into the next rotation.
And so just for clarification, that 6 to 12 months is how long would it take EPRI to take up something like the USB design requirement, or?
Yeah, so they would take that through the process of conversations, through the ANSI process, then through the CTA, and then publish the new standard.
Thanks. Any other thoughts in the room as we're talking through areas to be thinking of? I would like to go back just for a second to the timing and make sure, see if anyone wanted to talk more about that or offer other ideas. Shannon, you mentioned a phased in with the kind of starting with different classes of water heater. Had anyone else considered other forms of compliance? Maybe it's not just the timing, but other ways that we can think about compliance, such as a phase-in approach.
This is Glenn Blackman, and another timing question that we've talked about, and I guess it might be more for the utility and the demand response implementers. What are your perspectives on timing for this? Is it really important that we get a 2021 effective date, or somewhat important? I mean, how does this fit with your priorities as utilities and implementers? We might want to get some of that from people on the phone.
Fred has some general comments. He's typing away here.
If Fred wanted to, talk, that'd be,
Yeah.
Fred, if you want
Fred,
to
do you have
unmute
a
yourself.
microphone?
Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Very well.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm actually I'm on the webinar, but I'm actually using my phone just in case the webinar has problems. So thanks. I'm with the Northwest Energy Coalition, based in Portland. Johnny and Amy Wheelis, our staffers, are in Washington. Amy's basically our lead on this, but she's on vacation right now. So what I'm saying will, reflect my views. I think our general views. The coalition will, I would expect, submit some written comments. So we may vary somewhat from what I'm saying now, but I think this will capture it pretty well. So just a couple thoughts. First, just to highlight the importance of this standard from our point of view. Water heater, controllable water heaters are a really big resource from the point of view of the electric grid. A major peaking impact, a lot of potential there for peak load reduction and for time shifting load to match better to the needs of the grid. A lot of potential value is there, and it can be implemented very quickly through the CTA 2045 approach, and obviously with the Washington law and with the process here. At the same time, we recognize it's not going to happen instantly. The market, this is a market transformation effort. There will be an evolution in the process. We'll have additional learning from implementation, both on the, through the supply chain and also from the utility side in accessing this new kind of flexibility resource. So I'd say we are open to the idea of, certainly to upgrades to the CTA 2045 standard, including USB port, other potential things that are going on. Alternatives that provide equivalence, and I'll get back to that in a moment, that's also worth thinking about. But again, for us, it's really important to get this off to a timely start and really make it available as quickly as possible. We recognize that manufacturers are going to have issues with design test, roll them out on the production lines, marketing, et cetera. A lot of work has to be done with supply chain. I think we're cognizant of all that, and the work that the BPA-sponsored project did, and a lot of work at NEA, PGE, and all the utilities that participated in the test program, provided us with a lot of really good detail about the potential for, the value of the resource, plus a lot of additional work has been done, especially with NEA and Jeff and others, to work with the industry and really work out the issues for making this happen. So all that said, yes, we are open to, potential changes or alternatives that, that meet kind of an equivalence approach. I think I am concerned about the equivalence and making sure that equivalence really gets us to where we need to be. That it does not lead to a situation where we undermine the approach of the CTA 2045 in providing a broad, open standard where interoperability is a really important factor, and the ability of both manufacturers, third-party suppliers, and on the utility side, the implementers, to take advantage of the broadest possible consistency in that platform. And so other options that are out there, I'm not really sure how OpenADR relates here. If they can provide that same kind of equivalence, we can certainly be open to that, but I think we have to be careful not to regress back to a situation where there's more proprietary lock-in or other kinds of features that make it more difficult for utilities to access the flexibility in the grid-integrated water heaters. And finally, just want to say that we appreciate the Commerce's approach to this process in really laying out a step-by-step, basically about a 5-month process here, and we'll certainly be involved all the way through. Thanks.
Thanks, Fred. Did anyone want to add anything to what Fred said? One thing I want to add that he mentioned was the report, the BPA, PG pilot that was done using response water heaters. I think everyone's probably pretty familiar with it. I'll make sure that it gets up on our website so that it's available to all. Jeff, or someone on the line, can you say a word about OpenADR and what that means for folks that might not know, and just to give some clarity about how it relates to CTA 2045? What does it mean?
Sure, this is Jeff Wicks with NIA. OpenADR is a great solution for demand response when it's a grid or utility to a building situation or to a large concentration of demand response, because it is a server-to-server conversation. Last time I checked, and I'd be curious if any manufacturers have one, most water heaters do not have servers in them. A lot of houses don't have standardized servers in them. They've got lots of servers. So there's oftentimes a broadband port, and there you might have a desktop and that sort of thing. But the reality is, this is a situation where a server to server is not the application for a demand response solution. The benefit to something like CTA 2045 is that it talks from a central location, either by radio, cellular, power line carrier, Bluetooth, 5G, whatever you want, to a fleet of many quickly. And we witnessed during the test, personally, Conrad would send out a command when we were doing some initial tests, and within less than 3 seconds, my water heater was responding. We need that kind of granularity, and we don't need to have it going from a server to another server farm to a replication someplace else. Those all happened in milliseconds, but it creates lots of opportunities that things get lost. And it adds layers of complication, lots of certification, and lots of certs that have to pass back and forth between a utility and a end-use load. And remind you, these are water heaters. They don't add a lot of load. Aggregate, they have a lot of savings, but individually, they don't. A building like the one we're in right now, if the signal came down from, you're covered by PSE?
PSE.
Yeah, so if PSE were to send a signal to this building and say, reduce your light consumption, raise your temperature of your air conditioning, that would make sense because you've got a building automation system that would be able to roll that out in a very classic way of DR. Server to server works great in large installations, buildings, factories, large loads. Not so well in the residential environment.
Thank you. Is there anyone on the phone that wanted to weigh in about the OpenADR or anything else that we've talked about?
Yeah, this is Connor Justus from Portland General Electric. So with regard to the sooner or later question, I mean, one of the problems that we face is this chicken or egg thing, which is in order to be able to market effectively to customers.
Hey, Conrad, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think you have maybe your phone and your mic on your computer on. We're getting a looping effect with the audio. Can you maybe mute one of those?
Is this better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. So I was starting to say about the chicken and the egg. I mean, in order to attract customers, you have to find the customers that have the, equipped DR-ready water heaters. And so right now, it's heat pumps if you can go through the manufacturer site, but even finding heat pump water heaters is a task, and only because we have rebates going do we have even names of people. So the core of the approach is that you start putting an interface on every single water heater that comes into a state. And then it doesn't happen overnight, because it takes, let's just say, 15 years for the models to go through the normal life cycle. So in 4 years, you only have roughly 25% of the tanks exchanged. And that's sort of like the minimal point before you can start explaining and marketing a program to people and say, hey, there's a new type of water heater, you can help us. And so getting to the sooner or later, we need these water heaters, especially we go through a whole life cycle, plus whatever time we take to get the standard in place. So we're talking, let's just say, 17 to 20 years before we've gone through one life cycle. And so the sooner we start, the sooner we can actually start a program. But we can't start a program right away because if only 1 year's worth of population of customers have this, it's too hard to communicate that message and too confusing to everybody else. So it's important to get something the manufacturers can work with. And so working within a reasonable extension, that makes life easier for them is important. But the sooner the better.
Okay, thank you for that. Just sort of the long time horizons we're talking about on some of this work.
And Sarah?
Yes.
This is Tony Koch with Bonneville. I'll also take an opportunity to, the second part of the question was, you asked about OpenADR. And so these are, 2045 and OpenADR have been in dialogue in other, in the HRI standard 1380. And so it's gaining good discussion, but I just, for point of clarification, 2045 is a hardware port with open communication, whereas OpenADR is an basically internet protocol. And so the physical infrastructure of how you get that command to the tank is not specified. So that's where it deviates from 2045. In other words, OpenADR does not bring a physical port, a modular solution. So that's where it doesn't, it's not equivalent, but they're in the same, they're both dealing with DR communication, but that's one thing that's important to note different.
Thank you for the clarification. So are there any other thoughts that people want to throw on the table? Anything else we want to address? I'm kind of just looking through a lot of good comments, it looks like, around the things that we have listed up here. And so that gives us a lot of good leverage to get started. We'll look forward to getting more details, hopefully some of the stuff that has been mentioned through written comments to start thinking about our draft rules. But we have a little while for that, so taking this August to kind of flesh some of that out would be great. Another request I have is just if there's anything that Commerce can do by way of facilitating any kind of conversations or other workshops, around, let's say, the equivalent standard, the OpenADR, like if that's something that would be useful for folks to maybe bring the experts on that in and have a really technical conversation that is above my pay grade right now. So it would also be useful for me, but I'd be happy to host something like that if that's something that would be useful to the folks in the room, including utilities manufacturers, whomever would find that useful. Yeah, Shannon.
Okay, so some of the questions our manufacturers have regarding CTA 2045 and how we're going to implement all of this. So evidently in the CTA 2045, it allows for AC and for DC module. So they need to, or they want to know what they should be prepared for, because whether they should be planning for AC power, DC power. So what do the utilities want, or what are they planning on using? Because that does have an effect on what they're going to be designing and within their companies. They also had the question of what type of signal do the utilities anticipate using? Are they doing cellular, radio? We have heard Wi-Fi is probably not the option that is going to be chosen, but whatever the option is, again, they need to know what they should be looking for and designing in order to implement this properly. So that's questions that we have for the utilities themselves, I think, more than anyone else. So.
Yeah, no, but I appreciate those being brought up. And if there's a forum that would make sense to collect those kinds of questions, it sounds like probably the best bet is having someone like, the manufacturers and the utilities talk together. But if there's a, document that well captures those questions, we'd be happy to use that and put it up or have it available so everyone can see it. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, this is Todd with AHRI. The other possible one to put in there is the utilities' approach to cybersecurity as it relates to demand response. That something that
Sure.
the industry is also looking at, but there's no real defined standard or path forward today.
And that's a hot topic in our state as well.
For you
For
as well.
sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if utilities have a view on cybersecurity as it relates to demand response implementation.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I think that's a good point too, right? There's a lot of kind of upstream and downstream conversations that are circled around the CTA standard. So once it's implemented with these kinds of cybersecurity interests, and then the manufacturers getting set up to produce the product, right? So really appreciate that that salience and getting the whole ecosystem of the conversation. Where Commerce can be helpful kind of outside of the rulemaking too, to present resources and do education, happy to do that.
So I guess, so this is Eric. I guess all a good conversation. I think one of the points we want to get across is, there's obviously a lot of unanswered questions and details, and until a lot of those details are really squared away, it's hard from a manufacturer standpoint to really start, potentially designing something that doesn't exist today. So I guess going back to kind of how we started this of the later effective date is, theoretically, I know Glenn mentioned, 12 months from ideally finishing at the end of this year till time we'd have to comply. That's extremely tight considering we wouldn't be able to start until January if we're lucky, and to be able to turn on, around electronics, whether it's onboard an existing control or as a separate module, knowing, how the utility intends to connect or what type of port, whether we have to modify a standard, which is going to add to the timeline, or are we going to have sufficient power in what either something we have existing or something we need to create. So we'll have more detailed comments that we'll provide in writing, but just the general point I want to get across is, we can't really go until things have been defined.
Great, thank you for that.
Yep.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so Sarah, can I maybe say something if you guys can hear me?
Yeah, please go for it. We can hear you.
Okay, so this is Ashley from AO Smith. So I'm going to echo a little bit of what Eric said, but I will underscore the importance of us all sitting down and working together. There's a lot of details that still need to be ironed out. AO Smith is committed to working with you guys, working with the utilities, working with our rest of our industry. I mean, we want to sit down and try to figure this out, and some of those details are going to have to be ironed out, and probably in person or over workshops or those types of things, but we want to come to the table and figure this out. Maintaining that some type of or equivalency document, I think, is going to be important, not only for your near term, but also long term. This is going to be a fluid situation. Things are going to change over time. We're all going to learn a lot of lessons as we work through this together. And having a quick way to do necessary updates that allows us to continue making products not just for the state of Washington, but for everyone, that aren't overly burdensome, I think is really important. So as we move forward and consider this, it would be really nice for whatever final form that or equivalence document takes, whatever the details are that's in it, that it can be updated in a relatively quick manner over time. Because I just foresee that being absolutely necessary.
This is Glenn Blackman, and I want to make sure that I didn't leave people with the impression that that this is a single opportunity to develop rules. It's not like it's something that either you or us would want to happen over and over again. But when I talk about completing it by the end of this year, that is, the that first time through to implement this year's legislation. And whether it's a new standard, a new version of an existing standard, or something like an equivalent determination, that's something that we'll be able to go back to later and address as things come along. So it doesn't have to end with this first process.
And I also appreciate, Ashley, you bringing that up because it sort of shows a little bit of the tension, right? We want flexibility to be innovative and to allow for that space, but then also to make sure that we have enough information to get manufacturers set up to do their work. So we do appreciate that. I can only imagine how loud that was on the mic. Great. Is there anything else that folks would like to bring to the table? Both literally, physically at this table or on the phone lines?
Well, this is Todd with AHRI. In terms of just to follow up on what Ashley had said, in terms of equivalency, I heard it in terms of the advanced water heater spec, which is an equivalency spec that's going to be looked at. I hadn't heard it in terms of the process of rulemaking. So would that be the process of going through the comments that we're talking about, where we would introduce equivalency and introduce some options to equivalency through the comment period, or do we need to look at alternative specs that are being created in terms of specs for standards as well? Is that all going to be through the comment period that we address this? I guess that's a good question.
And this is Glenn Blackman. I think that's a possibility. I mean, it's if somebody felt like there is another standard that is fully developed today that is equivalent, then they certainly could propose that as part of their August 26th comments and say, we think you ought to adopt a rule that allows this because it's equivalent. On the other hand, if it's something that is more of a work in progress, then we would continue to be open to the possibility of later saying, yep, that's equivalent, and so we're going to include that in the rule. So maybe that shows up in the second draft or something like that if it's not quite ready. And if it turns out it's something that's ready a year from now, then we'd be able to add that later to the rules.
Did that get at your question?
So I guess the interpretation is if it's not ready to go completed, then it's something that necessarily would not be considered in the rulemaking process. It has to be completed to be.
Well,
Go ahead, Sarah.
I would just say on that sounds to me like a reason to push back the compliance date. I mean, that would be, hey, there's a standard we think is going to be equivalent. It's not quite developed. It will be developed by X date.
Mm-hmm.
This is, we think it's going to be just the same, or, this is going to be compliant. This is a reason we want another year to develop that, for instance. This, I think, how I'm hearing your question.
Okay.
Glenn, I don't know if you had a similar.
Well, that could be, but I think there are multiple scenarios here. The one I was describing was where we move ahead as scheduled with CTA 2045, but we leave open the possibility of determining an equivalent one later. The one Sarah is talking about where it seems like the best course is to wait about implementing anything because of that opportunity to have a second standard in existence. And I would say at this point, they're both in front of us. They're both available for consideration.
And as much detail and information as you can get on that kind of stuff, that will help us.
Yeah,
when we
definitely.
put those drafts
Because we're sensitive to the need for answers promptly, specific comments from stakeholders are really helpful. we can all kind of circle around the questions for months and months and not make any progress.
We got a lot of academics in the room, so we can really, yeah.
You know, it seems like what the industry needs is you know, to get quickly to the key questions so that we can figure out solutions. So specific comments are really encouraged. Or proposals even, you know, specific proposals, you know, here's our plan, that kind of thing, are welcome.
Yeah.
And then we'll let other people, you know, the other stakeholders can look at those and agree, disagree, suggest alternatives, you know, but we do want to try to engage people early on and try to come up with, because we think that's how we can get to resolution by December.
So our document that has the or equivalent is about 98% there. It just requires a very modest amount of editing and integration of some questions that have surfaced. So we're close. And I'm not saying that dictates your schedule. I just want to let you know what we're thinking about.
Forthcoming.
Yeah, you know, we could be saying, yep, here's version 7.0 of the advanced water heating spec, last one was 6. It's now current, goes into effect this date, and here's all the material. And, you know, here again, I wanted to make sure we are in concert, not in conflict.
Yeah.
But if it's helpful for us to be moving further, faster, great, we can do that. I also don't want it to be lingering too long. So.
Shannon, any chance we can get a copy of that or equivalency document as you're working on it?
Absolutely. I June 4th, 7th, I sent it out to all of our all the OEMs that we know about, and I believe I sent a copy to AHRI for comments on the whole specification. Having not heard anything, I figured you were all good with it. We've heard from some of the manufacturers, so.
Yeah, I'm fairly new. That's about the
Okay.
week that I started.
You should have had it all done, yeah.
So you have my card if you
Yes,
wouldn't
absolutely.
mind sending it to me, that way I
Sure.
can take a look at it.
Absolutely.
Me as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
we're both
started on April 2nd, Shannon started on
May
May.
26th.
Yeah, I'm
May-
sure that
May
was
of-
right past where the bathroom was, and you were focusing a little on more important things.
So, yeah, so if you could do that, then
Sure,
I can
I will do
also
that.
recirculate it with our members and
Right.
see if there's anything that,
Excellent.
any
And-
comments we have.
I just want to remind people, the advanced water heating spec is a voluntary specification. And we have a specification, a test methodology, and a qualified products list. And every one of the major manufacturers have their products listed there, and a lot of utilities point their efficiency programs to that list on what they rebate. And there's multiple tiers there.
And that is, in its complete form, is about heat pump water heaters, right? And what we would be talking about is whether there's an opportunity to use the that communication design element more broadly with other storage water heaters as a second approach to complying with the Washington requirements.
Correct. Ours is about efficient water heaters. Anything in the electric world 2.0 or better, or in the future gas water heater specification, it would be anything over, I believe, a 1.0 or a 1.1 efficiency factor. And we focus on energy efficiency at NEA. We are not demand response specialists. However, we feel that the path forward is using efficient technology in a demand response environment, and you get the best of both worlds. And yes, it's mostly an efficiency document and customer acceptance and market transformation characteristics that make that product acceptable to the population, as well as implemented by the plumbers, distribution, and the manufacturers.
Thank you, Jeff. And if anyone on the line is having a trouble figuring out how to get in touch with Jeff, let us know. Put you in touch if you want to follow up with anything.
Absolutely.
He's the same thing. Great. All right. Anyone else have anything that we haven't gotten to address? Want to revisit anything we've talked about? Anything percolated out before having this conversation?
No, all right, so we have our 4 goals that I laid out. And so again, we want to make sure that whatever comes out of the state of Washington works for everyone. So, we're committed to working with the utilities, working with the state, but we do have to make sure that it's reasonable timeframes, to allow the manufacturers, time to actually develop a product that functions properly. We don't want something that comes out to consumers that ends up not working. That's just the nightmare situation for utilities, for the manufacturers, for everyone involved.
Everyone involved, that's true.
All right, just one last check on the phones. All right. Well, with that, we're going to get everyone out a little bit early today. So I really thank you for bringing a lot of these proposals to the table. As we've said multiple times, our email is open. So please feel free to be in contact. And, we have these materials. They'll be posted up on the website. So you'll have that kind of calendar list, and we'll update that as we go. Final note is that if you're interested in keeping in touch with what's happening around rulemaking as we update our calendar, you can sign up for our distribution list at commerce.wa.gov/appliances with an S. So please do that. And with that, I just want to say thanks again and have a good day.
Thank you, everybody. And on the phone, too. Thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
phone folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's Conrad Hughes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He does have a pretty distinctive voice.
He does, yeah.